right, A&P1 students, in this video we are going to start talking about the skeletal system. So this is our second body system that we're going to discuss. First, I wanted to share a little joke with you that I found that I think is hilarious. So one of the more funny ones that I found. So hope you enjoy that too. All right, so we are going to jump into our objectives for Chapter 7, which is the skeletal system. So the first thing we're going to do is just kind of get an overview of all the various structures that make up the skeletal system. And it's not just the bones, so we want to be familiar with the other structures and tissues. And then we'll talk a little bit more specifically about those different structures and tissues. And then I think we'll be able to at least give a general, at least list the general functions of our skeletal system. So, and you will notice when we get to the functions of the skeletal system that there are probably more functions than you were aware of for the skeletal system. So it does more than just support the body and, provide the framework and give, the skeletal muscles something to pull on to allow movement. So it's a pretty neat organ. Bones are pretty neat organs, and the whole skeletal system is pretty cool. So we'll learn a lot more about it in our Chapter 7 here. Okay, so the first lists the structures of the skeletal system. So I have listed them here. So bones obviously are going to be the primary structures. And they are, when we look at bone tissue, remember bone is a type of connective tissue. There's two actual different types of bone tissue that our bones are made up of. So we'll talk in the next objective about compact bone versus spongy bone. And then cartilage, and we looked at hyaline cartilage under the microscope in Lab 3, so everybody is probably familiar with what that looks like. One other type of cartilage that we didn't look at in Lab 3 was fibrocartilage, but that's also another cartilage that you can find associated with the skeletal system. And again, there'll be another objective where we talk more about the cartilages. And then ligaments and tendons. And so those are made up of that dense regular connective tissue, and they have different roles in the skeletal system. So we want you to make sure that you remember the ligaments are there to connect one bone to another bone. And then our tendons are actually connecting a muscle in the body to a part of the bone. So those are the those are the structures of our skeletal system that you should be familiar with. And so objective 2, we talk more about the difference between compact bone and spongy bone. And I'm going to go to our pictures here. Excuse me. And so when we're looking at compact bone and spongy bone, this is kind of a small picture. See if I can enlarge it. Yeah. Compact bone and spongy bone. And if you've had Lab 4, you've probably began to learn about the two types of bone tissue. So the compact bone, it's going to be the outer bone tissue. So it's that part that's really solid and dense. It's usually smooth and white. It's definitely, hopefully you can see that, it's definitely thicker along the diaphysis of this is a long bone that we're looking at. So it's definitely much thicker along there, but it does cover the ends of the bones, the epiphyses as well, but it's a little bit thinner, so it's a little harder to see. So that's compact bone. It's very solid, usually kind of smooth looking and white. And it's going to be on the outside of the bone. So it's more the superficial layer of any bone in our body is made up of compact bone. And then majority of our bones are compact bones. So like 80% of them are made up of that compact bone. Then the spongy bone, it is more porous. So it's got a different anatomy of compact bone. So there's a lot more spaces between the spongy bone. And so that's kind of why they called it spongy bone, because there's like a bunch of little holes in it, or pores they call it. So they call it porous. And you will notice that You can see it a lot more up in the epiphyses, those end of the long bones. But you can see some along the diaphysis too. There's just not as much of it. So that is our spongy bone, and it's more internal or deep within a bone. So it like lies underneath the compact bone. And it's the other 20% of our bone mass is made up of that spongy bone. So, all right. So we'll go back to our objectives. Oops, I highlighted that. And the next objective is over the cartilage. So we're going to look at hyaline cartilage and fibrocartilage and kind of just point out where you can find hyaline cartilage at, and there's 3 places, and where you can find the fibrocartilage in the skeletal system. So we'll go back to our picture. We'll make it a little bit smaller here. Okay, so the hyaline cartilage, that is cartilage that's generally located between 2 bones that are connecting. So, and we call an area where 2 bones connect a joint. And so we will use that term. Articulation is a term another term for joint. So sometimes you'll see hyaline cartilage just referred to as articular cartilage if it's located between 2 bones that are connecting. So example here, the head of the shoulder, head of the humerus here is connecting with the scapula, so our shoulder blade bone. And so that's where you can find some articular cartilage, is where 2 bones are connecting to each other. So articular cartilage is where joints are. So that's kind of why they give it the name articular cartilage. Sorry. And then another area, again, we have a bone here and a bone here. So connecting the ribs to the sternum is this cartilage that we call costal cartilage. So it's also made up of hyaline cartilage, just like articular cartilage, but it has its special name, costal cartilage, because of its location. So that's another place where you can find the, find the hyaline cartilage. And then the other locations, I will try to, whenever we'll talk about this in more detail in chapter 7. But when we are growing, so this is showing a young boy that's still growing. We have these areas, specifically in our long bones, you can see them really well, where we continue to have cartilage. And that area of cartilage is there to allow for the continued growth of the bone, like the growth in length. And they commonly call those growth plates. But because it's near the epiphyses, they'll also call it the epiphyseal plate. But that's another place where you can find hyaline cartilage. And so it's at the epiphyseal or growth plates. So those are the 3 locations for the hyaline cartilage. So between 2 bones connecting, which we call articular cartilage, between the ribs and the sternum, which we call costal cartilage, and then also at the epiphyseal growth plates. So we call that epiphyseal cartilage. All right. So that was for our hyaline cartilage. The next type of cartilage is called fibrocartilage. And so this type of cartilage is a little bit different. It's more there for compression purposes. So it allows for bones to structures to compress, and it provides that cushion, so it can withstand some compression forces. So where you can find the fibrocartilage, there's 3 places. So one place is the little intervertebral discs that we learned about in lab 4. Those are, in this picture, they're showing them as purple. So those are the little fibrocartilage pads that sit between the bodies of the vertebral bones that are connected here. So those little intervertebral discs are actually made up of fibrocartilage. It's like a little pad of fibrocartilage, and that's a good place to have fibrocartilage because we get a lot of compression of those bones in that area. So you can find them, the fibrocartilage in the intervertebral discs. The next place you can find it is there is a little fibrocartilage pad that is connecting the right pubic bone to the left pubic bone. And so they call that the pubic symphysis. That's what that little fibrocartilage piece is called in this area. So they call it pubic symphysis. And that's actually a joint, just like the intervertebral disc, there are joints as well. But these specific joints and the cartilage that are part of them are called intervertebral discs. And this particular joint with the cartilage between the two pubic bones is called the pubic symphysis. And then if we slide up in our knees, and this is probably one that most, or a lot of people may have heard of, is the meniscus. That's singular, or menisci. So we already have, you can see the blue here, that indicates articular cartilage. So we do have that articular cartilage. Remember, that's made of hyaline cartilage. It's on the end of the femur and the tibia here at the knee. But you'll also notice that between those two bones, you also have these little fibrocartilage pads. And there's a lateral one on the outside, remember? Lateral and then medial. And so those are, and they kind of enlarged it here, those are made up of fibrocartilage too. But because they're in the knee here, they call it a meniscus. That would be singular, menisci for plural. So those are the three places that you can find the fibrocartilage within the skeletal system. So in the intervertebral discs, pubic symphysis, and then in the joint, the knee joint, so little fibrocartilage pads there. All right, so we're going to go back to our objectives. And so number 4 here, we're going to just go down through the general functions of the bone. And then as we go through the rest of chapter 7, then we'll get into more details about these general functions of bone. So these, I've listed them here, but you can also find them in our textbook. They're all listed here, and then they kind of give a nice explanation, which is good. So like I said, support and protection, most people are very familiar with that function of our skeletal system. So we generally know that the skeletal system is pretty rigid, and it's providing that framework for our entire body. So we're not just like a blob. So it does a lot of supporting all our other structures. And then it's also there for protection. So if you think of protection, think of ribs. Those are there to protect our heart and lungs, which are vital organs. Our cranial bones and our facial bones, those are the ones we learned in Lab 4 too. Those are all there to protect our brain. Our vertebral bones are protecting our spinal cord. So all our vital organs have some bony protection, which is good. And then the levers for movement, that just indicates that the bones provide that framework for the skeletal muscles to attach to them, and then when they contract, they can cause movement of the body. So we need to have, if we didn't have the bones, the skeletal muscles wouldn't have anything to pull on, so then we really wouldn't move. We'd probably just kind of quiver. So we need to have the skeletal system for movement as well. And we can do like really, cool movements, varying degrees of movements. So pretty like precise and specific and, slow movements to like, more, large, powerful contraction kind of movements. So. All right, so those are probably the two that everybody's pretty familiar with. Support and protection and levers for movement. Okay, so things that people may or may not be as familiar with is that, and we'll talk about this because we're going to talk about long bone anatomy, but inside our bones, in the marrow part, specifically, we'll talk about the red marrow part, that is where our blood cells are produced. So the bone is our skeletal system, our bones are the site of blood cell production. So like that's where our red blood cells are made, where our white blood cells are made, where our platelets are made, is in the bones of the body. So they call that process hemopoiesis. So that's the name of the production of blood cells. mineral and energy reserves are also stored within the bone. So calcium and phosphorus would be examples of minerals that are stored in our bone. We can get those, our body can get those to use for other body processes.